Creative Careers, Museums and the Arts, a LA County Library virtual event in partnership with the LA County Museum of Art, or LACMA. I'm Caroline, the Arts Program Manager at LA County Library, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, we wanted to make a quick introduction to one of our resources for parents and caregivers called Positive Parenting with one of our Positive Parenting librarians. So I'd like to introduce Yvonne.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if my camera will actually turn on or if it's residual thinking about it, but I just want to take some time to introduce myself. My name is Yvonne, and I'm a positive parenting librarian with LA County Library. Before we get started today, I want to tell you about how LA County Library can support your parenting needs. So I have been accredited by a research-based positive parenting program to provide tips and resources to help you with your child's behavior. These tips include topics such as encouraging creativity, supporting your partner, and balancing work and family. I'll also be available during the program to answer questions in the chat, as well as for 10 minutes after the program ends. You can schedule a one-on-one consultation with the Positive Parenting Librarian. These consultations are available in both English and Spanish, and I'm posting the link into the chat right now if you're interested in that. Okay, so you'll also be able to find the link to this consultation in the email that will be going out after the program ends. Again, I'm so sorry that I slid right in, but I'm glad that I made it. Thank you, Caroline, for doing such an excellent job of being prepared to take over for me. And I look forward to talking to you all. Take it away, Caroline.
Great. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for telling us all about the wonderful resources for parents and caregivers. So continuing with today's program, today LACMA Content Specialist for Mobile Programs, Dr. Omar A. Alcover-Firpi, is going to talk to us about what content specialists do and how to get started in that profession.
So thank you everybody for being here today. I'm very excited to talk to you all about my position over at LACMA as a content specialist. In particular, I want to thank Caroline Chang and everybody at the LA County Library for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to have a chance to speak with you all on my work and about myself and how my previous background informs the kind of work that I've been doing over at the museum. But before moving forward with my talk, I want to recognize the people and land from which I am giving my presentation. So LACMA in Los Angeles County more broadly is the ancestral and unceded territories of the Gabrieleño Tongva, the Gabrieleño Kish, and the Fernandeño Tataviam and Ventureño Chumash peoples. And as you know, Los Angeles County has been and is home to many of indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands are here and elsewhere. And I would like for us to please take a moment and consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have brought us here together and join us in a refusal to accept oppressive systems as they are. Now, today, as Caroline mentioned, my name is Omar A. I am a content specialist for the mobile program in LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where we visit 6th and 7th grade students across LAUSD, so across the Los Angeles Unified School District. And the program is supported by a generous grant from the Max H. Gluck Foundation, which allows us to visit schools with our mobile classroom, which is a 50-foot truck that's redesigned to look almost like an archaeological excavation, really providing a new space for students to engage and learn about the materials in the museum's collection and about art more broadly. But beyond having these roving classrooms for art education, one of the other distinguishing features of our program is that we bring actual objects from our collection to the schools. So students will get a chance to not only hold and ask questions of these materials, but really create larger connections and narrative based on what their experiences is, not only observing and looking, but connecting these materials, these art objects, to their own lives. Now, I want to talk a little bit before jumping into a conversation with Carolyn about the position and a little bit more about my background. I'd like to talk about, or the position, I should say, I would like to talk a little bit about my background, which is different from other museum employees, other art educators at LACMA and other museums. So my training is as an anthropological archaeologist. And I have spent the last around 8 years of my life leading community-centered research in Guatemala. So When I say anthropologically centered approach to arts education, or when I say I'm an anthropologically centered archaeologist, what does that mean? What am I really talking about? What do I want folks to get out of that? So basically what it means is that my focus of research is not just on objects in and of themselves or art in and of itself, but what it can tell us about the communities that made them. It means that my focus is really on people. What are their goals, their ambitions, and their modes of understanding the world? And that's how I approach that's my philosophy when I approach arts education. It's really bringing it back to the people. So to get at this, it means that as researchers, as an anthropologist, an archaeologist, we have to become knowledgeable in a whole range of fields to try and answer these questions of how do people relate to the world and art. We have to learn about chemistry. We have to learn about history. And in my case, I have to learn about geospatial sciences and archaeology and archaeological field work. So one of the things that I'm hoping to impart through this lecture, through this short conversation that we'll have today, is that if this is the kind of position at the museum that really caters well to people who are, one, continuously interested in learning new skills, methods, or even fields, and folks that have a real interest in doing collaborative, community-centered work. So those are the main takeaways that I would like for all y'all to take away from my conversation today, is that, as researchers, as art educators, we're constantly learning and we're constantly trying to find new ways of engaging audiences and learning about the materials in our collection. And as you mentioned, if something is not clear or if you have a question, I am trying to pay attention to the chat, so I'd be more than happy to jump in and try and answer your question if you have one during the presentation. So quickly within my background, so my master's and dissertation research took place in an area called the Usumacinta River Valley of northwestern Guatemala, which is one of the most remote corners of the Maya world. So as you know, Guatemala, all of Guatemala and large portions of southern and northern and southeastern Mexico are the traditional territories for different Maya-speaking community or different indigenous communities that identify as Maya within their own unique communities. And I should say it's one of the most beautiful areas that you could ever visit. And it's marked by this, the Usumacinta River, which crisscrosses through different portions of the jungle. And it's truly a incredibly unique and beautiful space that if you ever get a chance to go to visit, I highly recommend it. And so, as I mentioned, my background is in research, particularly field work. And so for my dissertation, I established my own project at a site called Macavidero, where we built our own camp in the jungle to study what is basically an early hilltop refuge. And one of the things that's interesting about this kind of work that prepared me for what I'm doing at LACMA is that the actual research questions and the areas that we decided to focus on in our work were collectively defined with my friends in the towns of La Técnica, Santa Rita, and Nuevo Horizonte in northern Guatemala. And these are folks that during the Guatemalan Civil War took refuge in this very jungle, escaping persecution from the Guatemalan military. So it's really this kind of collaborative work that easily translated to the work I'm doing now at LACMA, where my department particularly are really focused on developing content and programming that caters to the needs of students and the community members or the diverse communities of LA County. Now, I just love to show this picture because it gives y'all a better idea of what the conditions are doing field work in this part of the jungle. So this is a view of our pantry, which comes complete with a box full of black beans, maseca for tortillas, and a whole arrangement of veggies that survive rather well in the humidity of the jungle. But it just to give you some flavor as to the kind of space and work that we were doing, And so as an anthropological archaeologist, I approach my work through research questions, many of which are answered through one, library research is always the first source that we go to learn about different communities and materials, but also through archaeological excavations. And so here we are excavating, our team was excavating one of the many plazas or a public space at the Maya site that I was working at. So in here, we're trying to find data to answer what kind of activities were people doing in the past here. So by excavating, we're able to gather data and start answering those questions, and part of the process, we have a research question that we move towards acquiring the data. And then from there, we start analyzing some of these materials. And one of the first ways is by separating and cataloging all the materials that we have. So here we have our colleague channel with sifting through the dirt that we've excavated and documenting every single piece or artifact that we were able to collect. And then this is us documenting said materials in our field lab. So this is a little lab that we set up in the jungle where we clean, categorize, and then photograph all of the objects that we have acquired through our excavations. And one of my areas of expertise that I developed during my dissertation research is on digital methodologies for documenting material, but also presenting material, how we can present materials in engaging ways digitally, which turns out that with the current pandemic, these are useful skills to have in my area of research, where we can really, really take advantage of all of the digital resources and activities that are available to us online. And so just to give you another idea of the kind of work that I was doing is on documenting spaces and landscapes in 3D. And this is really a tool that has been of use in my position at LACMA. So I give you just a brief overview of what my work looked like prior to coming to the museum. How do I translate these skills and these materials to the work I do now? Well, they actually translate quite easily into the work. So at LACMA, we are very much focused on being a museum for the many communities of LA County. And it's this community-centered approach that's at the heart of the programs that we develop. So in the next couple of minutes, I'll just go over some of the steps that I take as a content specialist, as well as some of the work that I develop, as well as some recent materials that we've been able to make to tell you how my perspective as an anthropological archaeologist informs the work of a content specialist. So the very first, as I've been repeating ad nauseum through this presentation, is research and collaboration. So we work in the museum as a content specialist. I work across multiple departments in the museum. So I collaborate with curators in different fields, particularly folks in the art of the ancient Americas, collection management folks that gives us access to the materials that we bring to our schools, as well as a whole range of educators. So a couple of weeks ago, you learned from Kitty Younger about what it means to be a teaching artist or an educator in the museum. So we work a lot with folks like Katie to develop not only new engaging lessons, but also to have actual research as to what these lessons are going to look like, what we want students to get out of them, and as well as thinking through how we can connect them with future or past exhibits in the museum. So it's really this whole holistic approach to developing materials. And so this is just an example of some of the content that we've been in partnership with the Art of the Ancient Americas, where our colleagues, some of the curators in the department, have developed, particularly Elisa Carter, has developed 3D models of some of the codex vessels that we have in our collection. So these are Maya vases that date to between 500 and 900 CE. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do to develop is create images and highlighting different features of these vessels to show kids, to show students across LAUSD of how these worked, that you can actually read the glyphs, that these are tied to larger mythologies, right? So in this case, the areas that is highlighted with letters in A, B, C, D, and E is basically describing that these are describing basically the owner of this vessel and saying that these are, the holy snake lord of the site of Calakmul, right? So this is the kind of work that we do. So it's a lot of research and then collaborative work with other members of the department, of the museum, and then translating that work and developing lesson plans. So as I was mentioning at the beginning of this presentation, the program I work with, which is the mobile program at LACMA, used to visit schools physically. So we would have this 50-foot truck that would visit the classroom, and we would bring a whole range of art supplies and objects from our collections for students to engage with and have these conversation-based lessons. But in this new digital space, we have shifted, from this in-person lessons to and resources to taking advantage of what the digital space can offer. And so here's one example of this platform called StoryMap, which allows us to create very engaging materials digitally that basically conglomerate images, 3D models, maps, videos, and text, as well as audio files to create a very compelling lesson that students can basically follow along on their own. And if you want to learn more about these, I'd be happy to show one as an example later on. And so as a content specialist, one of our focuses is to get students talking about art, to really feel like they have something to contribute and have a real connection to the materials in our collection. Now, so in our digital lessons, so some of the lessons that we do now virtually, one of our focuses is to let students lead the conversation. So we have these prompting questions such as, let's look at this object together. What do you see? So these very open-ended questions that we pose students along with this. So this is actually a 3D model of an Olmec style plaque that you see here made out of stone. So what we do is we move the model around and then just open the floor for students to have questions, have a conversation, talk among themselves, and really foment critical thinking and observation skills. Now, finally, one of my last responsibilities that ties into my work is analyzing some of the data that we acquire. How many students are we able to visit? What does the engagement look like? What are the schools that we're able to visit, right? So that gets into some of the more data analysis and visualization, which directly ties into my background in geospatial research, which is one of my areas of expertise. So here we're trying to really try and quantify, not only for ourselves, but for our funders, as to what is our impact in the community? How many students have we been able to visit? How many resources have educators and teachers used that we've been developed from objects in our collection? And so this is just to provide y'all a brief overview of the kind of responsibilities that I have as a content specialist, my background getting into this position, as well as how you can come in not necessarily from an art historical or simply education background, but you can come in from a whole range of different backgrounds and have very meaningful things to contribute to arts education and museum work in general. And so with that, I am more than happy to start answering questions and open up a conversation with y'all. So thank you very much.
Great. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Omar, for that wonderful overview. It's a really nice to see it, kind of the path that you took, and really cool to share those photos of the kind of field work that you've done. It's probably rare for a lot of people to see that kind of stuff. So if anybody watching has any questions, again, please, you can chat your questions to us on the right-hand side of your screen. Make sure you set it to all panelists. But I have a few questions to kick it off here. So I'm wondering if you could start us off with talking a little bit about why you think, the museum or the arts, or what you do, why it's important to communities during our current kind of climate in our communities and society.
Yeah, so thinking about why these kind of programmings are important. So I'll say this, in our current situation, I just had meetings with teachers. One of the most important things that we're providing is not only a service to teachers where they have been really pushed to develop a whole range of digital materials from scratch. And that has put a lot of pressure on different middle school, elementary, and high school teachers who this was not their traditional way of teaching to their classes. So one of the things that the museum has been essential in doing, along with not only the program I'm in, but in all of our colleagues' program, is developing these digital resources, developing these digital lessons that teachers can very easily integrate into their curriculum. So this is one of the key things that we've been providing as a resource to teachers is the opportunity to not only engage with art as part of their lessons, but to really be able to rely on us to have quality educational materials for their lessons and for their classes, regardless of the point in time that they're teaching. So, for example, our sixth grade materials focus on the early world culture. So we're talking about ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, as well as different communities in the Americas. A lot of them don't have the opportunity to develop from scratch these like very elaborate materials. So we were able to provide that. For seventh grade, the focus is particularly on the indigenous Americas. So we talk about the Maya, Inca, Aztecs, as well as Taino groups in the Caribbean. So it's really providing these materials for teachers that I think has been a critical element for us. But even beyond that, it's a break for students. Students get something different out of the regular classes. They get to engage with materials in very personal ways, so they make very distinct connections with the art that we're showing. And since it is conversation led, there's no right or wrong answers. It's really, what do you observe? What do you think? And having that conversation, I think, enables students to have a more direct approach and more of a direct relationship with art, which is something that we really strive for in the museum, that have people make that connection. Just like the LACMA is your museum, is the county's museum, right? It's a museum for everybody. We want everybody to feel like the collection is there for them as well, even when the museum's closed and we have these in the digital space.
Awesome. And you kind of mentioned it already, some of the people, but I'm wondering if you could describe some of the roles of the people that you work with closely at the museum, and maybe like the department you're in, and are there other content specialists, kind of the landscape of that structure?
Yeah, right. So right now within my sub branch, which is the school and teacher programs, I'm the only content specialist, and I work predominantly with the sixth and seventh grade materials, which is when they really start discussing uh, early world cultures and then indigenous cultures in the Americas. So that, since that is my area of expertise, I really work heavily in these sections. But I collaborate with a whole range of folks in our museum. So within our education and public programming department, I work with Maria Ramos on developing materials for community center programs. I work with one of my colleagues, Albert Valdez, to develop more materials and work for our mobile programs. And then I also work with the teacher side of things. So for example, we do have this event called Eve for Educators, which provide a whole range of resources for teachers across LA County. And I'm working with them to develop materials that are specifically focusing on the art of the ancient world of the Americas. Beyond our department, we collaborate a lot with folks in curatorial, right? So they are some of the first line of contact to understanding more or acquiring more information about the object or cultures that we're discussing in our lessons. But more recently, we've actually been working a lot more with folks in conservation. So on the more science side of how do we know what we know about these objects? How do we take care of these materials? So they provide incredible insights into this, into how the museum not only manages and protects, but how do we know what we know about the structural compositions of objects? So being a content specialist in some ways is being a liaison between a whole different range of people in the museum, and then synthesizing the information you get from them to be very easily accessible to students and teachers. So that's a little bit more about how we work with our colleagues.
And what kind of tips would you give someone who is just starting out or looking for their first job or exploring this kind of particular industry?
Yeah. So I would say that there are a lot of internships both at LACMA and beyond, and those are great points or opportunities to not only get to know a particular position in the museum, but to move around and learn about what other folks are doing. So, for example, we have interns that come in every so often into our department, and they're able to rotate across uh, different fields. So, for example, some of them may be able to work with us on the content development side. Others may be able to work on the more logistical work, working with teachers and communities. So it provides them a nice introduction into what are the roles in the museum and what is the areas that you would be more interested in pursuing. I think that gives you a better perspective coming into museum work, because you might be very interested in the education side of things. That might be an interest, but then you learn about conservation work and you realize, oh wait, no, this combines my passion for chemistry and I wouldn't say arts and crafts, but in manual labor, in actually working directly, tangibly with objects, and maybe that would be more of a clear interest to you. So it really would be worth looking into what are some of the internship opportunities available in different museums. And wonderfully, Southern California has quite a few museums that offer these kind of positions. So that would be my first inclination into what would I would suggest to go to learn about more of the museum's positions and how to get more directly involved. Um, the other way would be there are several part-time positions in the museum as well that allow uh, oh, I see folks in the chat as well. So I'll make sure to get to some of these questions as well. Yeah, but part-time positions also allow for that kind of exploring to see, maybe I'd like to focus more on teaching. Maybe that's not my actual area of interest. It can get tricky in the sense that somebody like myself, where I am just constantly curious and wanting to learn new things and continuously be learning, then the position I'm in fits perfectly because I basically have to learn about all these different fields. From we were talking before, we learned about not only arts education, but about you need to learn how to use Photoshop. You need to learn how to be a good writer. You need to learn how to, in my case, how to do 3D models of objects in our class. So you end up being a jack of all trades, and that's actually a lot of fun on my end. So it's one of the great ways that you can like really bring in your skills. But what I will say is museums host people with a wide range of talents and expertise. It's not just within art specific things. Collections management does so many cool things and integral components to the management and function of the museum. Our conservator colleagues do so much incredible work, not just in our collection, but they contribute to the community at large. So one of our colleagues, for example, was invited to the San Diego Comic-Con to talk about, so what are the best practices used in the museum to conserve paper and objects? How can you apply that to comics in this sense, right? How do you protect these like old historical comics from the decay of time? So you can really come in from a whole range of interests and areas of expertise and find a position that applies some of them or most of them in a museum environment. So I think it's worth noting that that to be a museum worker, museum colleague, you can come in from a whole range of backgrounds. So that's really neat. That really helps us in the museum. This diversity of folks and talents.
Awesome. And I do want to talk about education and stuff, but we do have a few questions specifically about internships. Or one person did ask if volunteer opportunities is a way to get involved in this department or doing this kind of work or these programs.
Yeah, there's several volunteer opportunities actually. So one of them is for our docent council. So they participate and volunteer in a lot of the tours that we would have in the museum. So they get to work with curators and education specialists to develop tours. Of course, these are all in the digital space right now. Internships, like I was saying before, allows you to do with a little bit more, I think, flexibility, I would say, into jump around into different areas and then focus on one that you're the most interested in. And then, although I would say applying for part-time positions would also be another opportunity, but currently we are in a just a total museum freeze due to the current pandemic. But I'd be happy to I don't have them on the top of my head, but I'd be happy to share some more resources online so that you can share with them, Carolyn.
Thank you. And do you know if any of these internships or even, I think even the part-time job, are those open to folks in high school or high school age?
I believe there used to be high school programs, and they're mostly working with our colleagues in family programs. But I would have to get back to you on the actual details of that. But our folks in family programs, which host a whole different range of programming and art education for families at large. So they have more of these opportunities, but I have to get back to you on the specifics of them.
And I think it might depend on the, like, different museums might have different kind of types of internships too, right? So if you're interested in it, I would look around to see if there are any open high school kind of opportunities at smaller museums or different ones.
And I would also recommend, if you find folks in different departments that you're interested or that you'd be interested in working and learning more about, feel free to send them an email. Folks are very, a lot of museum workers are very much happy to answer any questions you may have. So if you find somebody that's in a position that's relevant or that you might be interested in, they'd be the best person to tell you how to best connect or see how you can volunteer.
Cool. And so I guess we can talk about a little bit about education. Like, what are the different kinds of educational pathways to working in this space, or are there specific degrees or certificates? You talked a little bit about like this kind of jack of all trades. How would one kind of become a jack of all trades, I guess?
Yeah. So and of course I'm biased on this, but I would recommend studying anthropology. I think it provides a really solid background in not only understanding different communities and cultures, but also understanding the respect one has to have to the materials that we have in our collection. I think anthropology makes you well suited to understand and apply a whole range of social science skills that you can do that you could apply for this position. But a lot of our colleagues in our department have a lot of different degrees in art history or education specifically, or education, like a bachelor's in education specifically. So there's a whole range, I would say, that can get you into a position like this. And I should also mention that another means of getting this information, you don't need to have a super higher degree. So I got my master's and my PhD in anthropology and archaeology, but that came mostly from a personal interest in continue developing in these fields. But I wouldn't say that they are the requirement in any way to have a position like the one I have or other positions in the museum. So I think fields in the arts, art history, or even practical uses of art, not practical uses of art, but like engaged forms of art, like the practice, or in the social sciences, I think prepare you very well for a position such as content specialist.
Cool. And I'm wondering, sorry, I'm just off of some of the things you're saying. It sounds like there are ways, like, so if I enter a job in a museum, are there ways to move into different departments within that field? Does that make, like, if I start in education, is it possible to like jump to a different department or to learn more and stuff like that?
I'll say that's a trickier question. In my experience, it highly depends on the size of the institution and of the openings in different positions, but uh, it's easier to move into different positions within your own department. So within education, it's a bit easier to do that. But I think it's and some of my colleagues may be able to provide better insights on this, but uh, I I think it's a little bit more rare for folks to be moving from for example, education to conservation work, just because there's a whole set of skills that would be required to do one or the other. So what ends up happening more is that not so much that you move between departments, but that you're able to form partnerships and collaborations with other departments. So if you are I'm personally interested in a lot of the conservation work. So one of the programs that we were doing this summer was developing a series of videos and educational materials for students so that they can learn about what conservation folk do in the museum and how you could be a part of that. So there's more collaboration that happens, but the actual movement between departments, I think, is a bit more rare. But again, that is going to be highly dependent on the institution that you're looking at.
Right. So let's see. So what are some things that somebody should think about before they pursue a career in this field, such as the lifestyle, type of income, balancing work and life, who you might be working with?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just for the sake of transparency, um, the pay is not necessarily the main drive for folks doing this kind of work. I think what you really do get out of it is um, that community, like that connection with the community and the students. So you are able to create a space for students to have opportunities that maybe you didn't have, or maybe that you wish you could have experienced at that age. So I can speak for myself. One of the things that drew me to this position were more so that as a high school student, I grew up or elementary school student, or even just across my education at large. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I think our school was able to interact and visit the museum, maybe the main art museum, maybe once in over 12 years. So it just made me it feels as in that institution is like alienated from the community at large. And one of the things in the position now is like, I don't want that to be the feeling community members or the people in LA have with LACMA. I want them to feel like, no, I am part of this. And I visited for a whole range of experiences, right? From actual visiting art to our wonderful summer music festivals, right? Or our events that we have, our Friday jazz events, so that I would really want folks to feel comfortable with this space being part of their own community and not just this alienated area. So that's one of the main things that really drives and that you can get out of this of work in a position in the museum. In terms of lifestyle, I think you end up being exposed to a whole range of artists and art that you wouldn't have otherwise necessarily, because it's like that, what I was saying again, that uh, folks come in from so many different backgrounds that you end up learning from everybody. So you're able to really engage with a whole range of art and cultures and materials that you wouldn't have otherwise. So those are some of the main things I would say like are really rewarding from a position in a museum, working in a museum or an arts education more broadly.
Thank you for your honesty too and your openness about what the kind of lifestyle is like. Can you share something, if you're willing, along your journey which you might be considered a failure and maybe something you learned from it?
Oh yeah, so let's see. From that, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, a I'll preface it by saying I started in my position in November of 2019. So when the pandemic hit, I was just a few months into our position. So one of the things that we were developing at the time were all these like written curricula and a whole bunch of engaging like physical material that we could have for students and teachers. And that, of course, that all got put aside on the back burner. And unfortunately, it's one of the biggest regrets that we've had is that we haven't been able to pick those up again and engage, or that our focus have shifted so dramatically because of the conditions that we're in and will continue to be in, that it feels like we have abandoned all these other projects that we were very excited about and making good strides towards. But then to flip that, with that failure in a sense came an opportunity for developing and thinking in new ways. It really shook us in the way that, okay, like, why don't we have more digital engagement when some other museums, this is like their pride and joy. They have so much material for their audiences, but that wasn't the case for us. So it's like, okay, then let's turn all that energy into these productive mode, and that's where we came about with like the videos and 3D modeling and interactive maps and components like that that have been very successful so far.
That's we actually had somebody with a pandemic question. Does
Oh yeah.
holding classes online have a negative impact? I assume that being able to interact with the materials in person has a lot of benefits that aren't present when it's online. A little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a negative impact. It's definitely a different kind of impact. Students are still very excited to work with the 3D models because, um, you know, when we were in person, the comparison was, usually all these materials will be behind a glass box, and you wouldn't be able to not only touch them, you wouldn't know how much they weigh, and many of them you wouldn't be able to see one side of it, usually the bottom of the object. When we're in person, we were able to bridge that gap and say like, okay, now you're able to hold them, manipulate them, and ask your questions. Um, what is interesting is that in the digital space, we're having the same conversation still. Students are still engaging in very similar ways than we used to in person, at least for this particular element. Now, what is truly not the same, and it's a shame, uh, uh, and not the same as in that it's worse or not as good. It's different. All this is different. Is we used to provide all of the art supplies and materials to schools. Some of our colleagues have been able to really continue that, but in our particular program, the logistics were just too complicated. So one of the ways that we were able to provide an equitable access to the art is that we foot the bill for all of the materials that students and teachers would need for the lessons and beyond. Uh, that is not the case anymore. We're not able to provide them with the actual material. So we switched to more simpler activities using pen and paper, drawing, that still engage in the same art educational concept, just at a reduced amount of materials that we could have. So I wouldn't necessarily, just to recap, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a negative impact, but it's a definitely different one to some extent. But one of the things that is interesting, so other different school districts, for example, KCRW had this interview of school districts in Utah, where instead of actually opening up more in person, they're actually expanding their digital material because for some folks, this is a lot more accessible to them. It provides an opportunity to learn in a way that is a lot more understandable to different people. So I think one of the things that we're going to learn through this pandemic, and if we haven't done so already, is that there are some students that benefit from the online learning and some that simply do not. So we will have to think, how do we make sure that we provide equitable access to arts education to everybody, both in person and online. And that is something that we have continuously been thinking about and discussing with teachers so that, we do provide the best experience possible now and moving forward.
That might be a good segue to this next question. Maybe it's a part of it. So what do you see is the future of this field or the work in this industry, and how should young people or people who are interested in this prepare for that future?
Yeah, so I think there has been such a dramatic shift in how we approach things with a pandemic, that I don't think digital learning is going away anytime soon. And that means we have to be prepared to continuously learn of the new technologies and platforms that allow for digital engagement. So one thing that stays the same, we're constantly learning. We're going to be continuously learning, applying, researching, and looking at new ways to engage with students and our audiences at large. So one of the things that I would suggest to folks that are getting into this field is to start really learning more about some of the digital platforms that are used in education. So for example, one of the platforms that we studied over the summer was Story Maps, because it allowed a more interactive lesson. Literally, students can click through different portions of the lessons and things activate and move, and there's sound, and it's a lot more of an engaging process. So what I would recommend is that folks going in learn about these platforms, and it maybe won't be Story Maps in the next year or two. Maybe it'll be something else. Maybe it'll be teachers are very excited about using Pear Deck. Is another one that they use for Google Slides. So I think being versed in some of the latest technology and work is going to be very useful. The other thing that I would recommend is, in many ways, coding, particularly learning Python, which is a very popular scripting library or scripting language that has a huge base of users. So there's a lot of really great materials that once you know a little bit of coding, it opens the world up for the kind of platforms and materials that you can use for teaching. So for example, Google has a lot of collaborative work with educators on developing like music platforms. So there's this Chrome Music Lab, which is really neat, and that teachers have been using for students to create very cool, like short music projects for themselves. So I think, I mean, and I'll say I'm biased because this is an area that I'm particularly interested in, but I think learning all of the new technological bits and being very versed in how to properly use them is going to be key moving forward, because we might go back in person, of course, once all of this is passed and everybody's well vaccinated, but we will likely not be leaving behind engagement digitally, which is a great thing for accessibility. It means more folks will be able to look at and learn from what we have to offer than ever before.
Great. And I was typing out some of the things you were saying. So we will send everybody a list of resources after this is over. So I'll add some of that stuff in too. So so you have those in your notes as well.
Wonderful.
And so let's see. Yeah, that actually helped answer the next question. So so it sounds like, if I'm interested in this field, something I can do now, even though maybe museums aren't open, so I can't go get an internship or get a part-time job, is to just research the future of like digital teaching and learning coding and like that.
The other thing that I would suggest is joining different organizations. So for example, MESC is a very large organization that deals with museum and museum education more broadly. So joining these organizations also provides an opportunity to stay in the loop as to what people are doing, and opportunity, and as well as like internships and job opportunities as well. So that kind of work is that kind of engagement is also going to be very helpful for you to set the stage and learn more about this field.
And is that MESA?
MESC, yeah, I'll send you the link.
MESC, okay. Just want to make sure I get it right so I can send it to everybody.
Museum Educators of Southern California.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Uh, it's, yeah, so as we at our last like 8 minutes here, can you talk about what you love most about what you do?
I think it's seeing students get so excited when they learn about objects. So for example, we have this object that is a face, a plaque, Olmec style plaque from potentially the Gulf Coast of Mexico, that just has a face, and it's really great to see students start piecing out details without even telling them, without even asking, oh, what do you see up here? It's like they start piecing things together. Like they're able to be like, oh, I noticed this. Oh, I noticed that. Oh, is it made of this? No, that's not possible because look at this. It's so exciting to see students be very enthusiastic about learning because it's on their own terms. They're the ones defining like this is what I want to learn and look at. And I, you know, personally, that's what drives me to continuously learning things. As soon as I'm interested in something, I dive in and do a whole bunch of research because I need to know all these answers. Right? The latest has been like astrophysics. I want to learn about the cosmos, so I like dive in and look at all these materials on YouTube. So it's really great to see that when students have that form of engagement and have that they latch on to something that makes them very excited, that we can then like pushing that to continue fomenting that on them so that they feel not only like they have a lot to contribute, but that they have the tools to understand and learn more about the subject that they're interested in. That's the most exciting thing, I would say. It's really great to see that all the work that I've done previous in my past graduate career, that it has an actual application, it has an actual use, and is of interest to a larger community, particularly with students. So that's very rewarding from my job.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would love to see like, the faces of all these young people who like are just discovering something new.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. I have there's one question in the chat. Yeah. Oh, um, about the LACMA collection itself.
Oh
If
yeah.
you've ever seen the collection, does it have any materials that were found in California or Los Angeles?
So actually, it's very interesting if you look at the history of LACMA. So there was a point in time when LACMA and the Natural History Museum were just one institution. Uh, Prior to after the split, so the National History Museum kept all of the archaeological materials uh, from Southern California here, and LACMA took just the art material. Well, I guess it's an incredibly arbitrary way of defining those two things. But basically, the answer is no. We do not have materials so much from California. But one of the efforts that we've been doing is working with contemporary indigenous artists to acquire material, to acquire artworks from artists today, and see what they are doing and how we can engage with their community today. So that's the most that we've been working on right now in terms of materials from California or Los Angeles specifically.
And to close, what is something you would tell your teenage or younger self when thinking about your career?
I think to keep being curious and keep taking everything that interests you, because things have a way of working out to some degree. I When I was in high school and graduating, I mean, in Puerto Rico, the kind of opportunities that I had available to me were very different from when I was starting my graduate career. But what was very interesting is that if you have the opportunities to continuously learn and engage with materials and areas that really interest you, to continue pursuing that, continue pushing and learning and sparking that curiosity, because that's the only thing that'll keep you sane throughout and finding careers and opportunities. It's to continue to be curious.
Well, thank you so much, Omar. That was an amazing, like, kind of like deep dive, or maybe we probably could go deeper, but then kind of introduction to what you do in the museum and kind of the pathway to getting there. So what I wanted to do before we close out is to just mention that I know Omar had mentioned a few kind of skill sets and things that that might be helpful into entering this career. And I wanted to mention that the library has a lot of resources to help you get there or help you start this journey. And so we'll be sending as I mentioned, I'll be sending a resource list along with the things that we mentioned here today. But classes that Omar actually recommended that are on lynda.com, which you can access for free with a library card, as well as books, as well as other library services to kind of help you, like laptop hotspot kits if you don't have a computer, or our digital library card if you want to access our digital resources. So I do want to mention that there's ways to get your hands on some of this material for free through the library to get you started and to get you on this journey. And we did have a question in the chat, somebody asking if there are elementary age programming online that you can recommend for online learning. And I know the LACMA has a ton of wonderful online learning for, and the curriculum is really beautifully well laid out through their website. So I'll include that link too, but the website is lacma.teachable.com for curriculum for elementary school students. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the program, and a big thank you to Omar for imparting his knowledge and expertise with us today. We're going to also send everybody a recording of the presentation too, so you can review it. And I've also wanted to mention that we've partnered with LACMA to present one other creative careers program next month, as well as creative storytelling workshops for kids. So you can check out the full schedule online at lacountylibrary.org/LACMA programs, and I'll put that in the chat. And our positive parenting librarian, Yvonne, will remain in the event for 10 minutes after the program. If you have any parenting questions you would like to post in the chat, or you can schedule a one-on-one consultation with a positive parenting librarian, and we will post a link to that consultation link in the chat again. And if you're interested in participating in more of our upcoming programs, please visit us at LACountylibrary.org. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great evening, everybody.